Okay, we'll go ahead and get going here. What I'm going to do is I think see, Tina Marie, I see your note there. I think you're definitely in the meeting. I think we'll just have to figure out how to get you off mute there. So I'm going to bring up just a few slides. We'll go through them very quickly. I find that it's helpful to kind of level set on the issue. You know, folks come into the issue of redistricting at different kind of vantage points and knowledge bases. So we just covered kind of the fundamentals. Of course, we could spend a whole year talking about the nuances of redistricting, but we do want to make sure kind of everyone has the fundamentals here, so we can then, you know, ultimately in the latter half of this meeting talk about the boundaries themselves, which is really kind of the core purpose of these meetings. So you know, just real quick, and the first two pieces of this, again, we'll try to march through fairly quickly. You know, just covering the redistricting process, the basics of how it works and why it matters. We are going to take a look at the current city council map and the population figures. That gives us a sense of what pressures there will be on these lines as they potentially shift around. And in some places of the city, they will definitely shift around. And then lastly, of course, talking about the communities in a given area. In this case, this morning in South Philly. And realize South Philly is a very, very large section of the city. And the council district boundary that down there covers a long line, but we'll do our best to try to cover as much of that as we can. So you know, just to start, you know, redistricting, of course, is something we do only every once in a while, every 10 years after the population data is released from the U.S. Census Bureau. And you know, the most important reason why we have to do this is because people, of course, move around. People move around, people are born, people die, population changes, and it doesn't change evenly. And we need to make sure that there are roughly the same number of people in each political district. And that's true, of course, at city council level, state house, state senate, and congressional. So what's a little bit different about here in Philly, because not every city or town has districts to redraw. You know, we have 10 of them, and they're quite big and they're quite important. And the way the home rule charter, kind of our local laws, is set up, city council itself has the power to draw its own boundaries. Not a best practice, but that's the way it works right now. And another couple little quirks here. I mean, one is that council only has 6 months to do this. So from the day that the census data was released, August 12th, 6 months after that gets to February 12th, which is coming up pretty soon, right? That redistricting map has to be in effect and in law. And as far as the process goes, it's actually just the regular legislative process. So they will introduce a bill. That bill will describe ward by ward, division by division, where the lines are. And then that bill has to go into a committee. There's a hearing, there's a meeting, there's a vote, goes out of committee, back to council as a whole, and then they have to vote on it. And just like any other piece of legislation, it will then go to the mayor, who can sign it or veto it. And as recently as 20 years ago, there were a number of disputes between then Mayor John Street and City Council at the time. And City Council actually went for 5 months past their deadline without a mapping plan in effect. And the other quirk with our local redistricting process is that if a mapping plan is not in effect within that 6 month period, City Council, not just the 10, but all 17, start going without their paychecks. So in 2001, 2002, for 5 months, council went without pay, and now it got just put off to the side. They got it back. They got kind of like the back pay on the other side of it. But that's definitely an incentive, and it's kind of an unusual incentive actually to get a mapping plan done. So again, I mentioned these are very large districts, right? And we have a big city. We know from the census now we have about 1.6 million people across the city of Philadelphia. That's about 5% growth over the past 10 years. And when you do the arithmetic, 1.6 million divided by 10, that gets you about 160,000 people per district. And you know, we'll of course be talking about this current map, even the prior map. This is always a big deal, because we use these districts for a long time. We'll be using them in 2023, in the May 2023 primary election, when all 17 city council members, including the 10 district folks, the 10 district seats rather, will be on the ballot. We're going to use them in 2027 and 2031. Each of those are very, very big municipal elections for the city of Philadelphia. So that's just in a nutshell what the process is. And again, I'll pause here in just a couple slides for any sort of questions around all this. So as far as like why this process matters, right? I know this is a probably kind of a hyper-informed group, and you've been reading. There's been a lot covered around redistricting for several years now, but essentially it's about voice in our political process. The maps can be drawn in a crooked way, or of course the term is in a gerrymandered way to advantage or disadvantage parties, racial groups, certain communities, individuals, especially potential candidates or incumbents. And generally, kind of the more crooked or jigsawy the district boundaries look, probably the more of a problem that's there. Now, there are a lot of things to consider when you redraw political maps: competitiveness, partisan balance, compactness. But one of the most important criteria, and at least that a lot of advocates and stakeholders support, is generally communities. And when we talk about communities, it's in a very general sense, a broad sense. It could be a neighborhood, ethnic or language group, a business corridor. It could be a region of the city, right? South Philly as a regional community, West Philly as a regional community. And generally, not always, but generally, it's helpful to keep those communities whole within a given district. And if a community is split between multiple districts, to a great extent, they may have their political power diluted. Now, you may think that it would be helpful, perhaps, to have multiple elected officials, but generally what will happen, though, is when an elected official only represents a piece of a community or a piece of a neighborhood, for example, that neighborhood or that community may only get a smaller piece, rather, of that elected official's attention. And of course, our elected officials, they only have so much attention, they only have so much capacity, and if they only represent a piece of an area, they're just not going to give it the same attention they would otherwise. And then on the community side, right, they have to advocate towards or work with or work against multiple elected officials instead of just one. So this is not the case all the time, but generally it's a helpful thing to keep communities together. Of course, here in Philly, we're generally talking about, or often, not generally, but often talking about neighborhoods. Neighborhoods what come up most often. Ethnic and language groups also come up very frequently, and then kind of business corridors is what we've heard a lot about as well over the past couple months. So this is the big question. That map in the middle, drawn in 2011, is the one we have right now. It's actually, it's not in bad shape, and it's certainly in great shape compared to what we had before. So you can see the map drawn in 2001 was problematic, and there was one kind of big problem happening, of course, here in North Philly. It extended all the way into the Northeast. But what happened was the map was drawn, and the 7th district was drawn to include a bunch of voters in the Northeast who don't live in the eastern North Philly part of the city. Now, we've had a large and diverse Latino community in eastern North Philly for a very long time. That's predominantly, of course, what the 7th district covers. But the 7th district in this case was drawn to basically include a bunch of white voters going pretty far into the Northeast, who of course are not part of that Latino community in North Philly. And so that in effect diluted the political power, diluted the voting power of voters in the 7th district. So the Latino community at large was harmed in that map. But then also every neighborhood, every community along those crooked lines, going all the way up into the Northeast, all the way up to Grant Avenue by Northeast Airport, those communities were harmed too, right? Because they were fractured 2 or 3 different ways when they didn't have to be. So there was a great deal of advocacy and public engagement, community engagement around this process in 2011, and that's where the question gets raised sometimes. Is it worth kind of doing all this engagement on the outside when City Council has the power to draw these maps? And it's absolutely worth the effort. It's always worth the effort, and we have evidence here, kind of unfortunately, of where we had a very gerrymandered, a very crooked set of districts in 2001 that were drawn. And then in 2011, because of all that advocacy outside of City Hall, and then also some very hard work inside City Hall by a number of folks, including Councilmember Cunha Sanchez, who represents the 7th District, those issues were resolved. So, what will the map look like on the other side? No one knows quite yet. Surely there's been some amount of discussion inside City Council, that has not been shared out to the public yet. That one of the asks or demands is to share what the plan is, both for involving the public process-wise, but also like if there are proposed plans floating about, to share those so that people can take a look. And that's going to be happening pretty much in January when we come back after the holidays. So I realize I covered a lot of ground there. If folks have any initial kind of questions, thoughts, comments, insights, be welcome to kind of throw them out there. Yeah, and if not, we can go on to taking a look at the map. And yeah, Tina Marie, I see your note in the chat there. I just even made you a co-host of the meeting. I mean, maybe that'll to extend on your end be able to unlock the mute and video button. I'm sorry if there's an issue there. All right, so here we'll keep going. Just one more slide before we take a look at the boundaries in South Philly. So these are the population figures coming straight from the census. In the upper left-hand corner, you can see the target population for each district, about 160,000, right? That's 1.6 million, roughly, divided by 10. Now, fortunately, there's a bit of a rule of thumb here in terms of what the range can be. And basically, in the next map that's drawn, the district that has the fewest number of people can have no fewer than 152,400 people. The largest district, the district with the most people in the new map, can have no more than about 168,000. So this is basically a 10% gap or difference between the smallest district and the largest district. This is a very fortunate thing because on the congressional side, the court precedent indicates that you got to have the districts like exactly equal to the person. And when you do that, when you prioritize very, very heavily one criterion in redistricting, you end up having to sacrifice other things. So basically, if we had to do that here in Philly, and if we had to draw each district so that had exactly 160,400 people, we would be splitting a lot of communities just to achieve that population equality. So, I just go into that to make clear it's actually a good thing that we have a bit of a range here, and the districts actually don't have to be exactly equal, and that's not necessarily the goal. So on the right-hand side, you can see what the number of people per district is, at least according to the U.S. Census Bureau. And what we've done is highlighted those districts that have either too many or too few people. So the first and the fifth districts in red have too many people in them, right? And I'm sure for this group, like, this is not surprising. In the first district, which is currently represented by Mark Squilla, of course, down in South Philly, Center City, all the way up through Port Richmond and Kensington. Been a lot of new residents, a lot of development and gentrification, and that's where the population growth is coming from. You've seen the same thing in the fifth district, at least in parts of the fifth district. So those probably aren't surprising. The fourth district, Curtis Jones Jr. Up in West Philly and Northwest, you'd think that with all the new residents in Manning and Roxborough, that they would have a great deal of population growth as well. And the fourth did grow. It grew by about 4,000 people, according to the Census Bureau. But not enough to get within our range. So you can see the minimum number we need, right, is about 152,000. The fourth district, though, is short of that by about 5,000 people. So the 5,000 people are going to have to come from somewhere and moved into the fourth district. The last one is the eighth district in North and Northwest Philly, currently represented by Cindy Bass, and that district is also short a couple thousand. So you can see here in the table we listed, the first and the fifth have to lose divisions, and the fourth and the eighth have to gain divisions. So these are the same divisions we use for election purposes. So each division holds, somewhere in the range of 1,000, maybe 1,500 people, maybe 2,000 people. It does vary, but those are the building blocks of these districts. So we're not districting here property by property, block by block, but by division. And to some extent that makes things a little bit simpler, but it also it does create some limitations, because there are surely some lines we would like to run along a certain block or a certain road or street, but the division line does not follow that road or street or block, so we don't have that as an option. So that's what the population figures are. I'll note for this group that these figures actually hopefully will change. These population figures don't account for Philadelphians who are incarcerated elsewhere in Pennsylvania right now, and who could and should be counted at home here in Philly for the purpose of council redistricting. There are also city-run jails up in Northeast Philly in the 6th district, at least for maybe 5,000 people, those Philadelphians should also be counted at their home or last known address for the purposes of council redistricting. So these numbers actually could and should actually shift around a little bit if we're using that prisoner adjusted data. Now, just to be clear, like we're not talking about actually moving prisoners around physically, right, from a correctional or detention facility to another place. We're talking about on paper, like in this table, kind of counting them back in their home community instead of wherever they happen to be held and locked up. So Julie, question, fire away.
Yeah, I had a question about the division drawing. When or how are those determined, if you don't mind me asking?
Sure. No, that's a great and really important question. So the divisions the divisions get used for partisan purposes, right? We have committee people voted into each of them, but for election purposes, there's a process in the election code and state election law that sets out first the range, the number of voters that have to be within each division. I believe it's between no fewer than 200 and no more than 1,200 voters in a given precinct or given division. There are some exceptions to that, both in Philly and elsewhere across the state. But because we use these primarily for election purposes, in any given county in Pennsylvania, it's the County Board of Elections that either consolidates divisions sometimes or splits divisions at sometimes, basically redraws them in a given area. So here in Philly, our County Board of Elections is the city commissioners, the 3 city commissioners, and they do this. It kind of comes and goes, but maybe they did. I think the last time they did this was 2 or 3 years ago, because we went from 1,698 divisions to we're at like 1,703 divisions now. So yeah, they're the ones who redraw these things, and they redraw them, they certainly don't do them citywide. They keep their changes very concentrated in a given neighborhood. So yeah, that's how that process works. Yeah. Follow up?
Yeah, sorry. I know Ms. Charlene has her hand up, but
Go
I just
for
had a question about the commissioners, it's like up to their prerogative then to draw the divisions. Okay.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. So this is where there's a bit of a disconnect here, right? Between when we draw our council boundaries that depend on the division lines, and there's certainly there are some decisions we would want to make for council boundaries, but yeah, it's just disconnected entirely from the way the divisions are drawn. Yeah, and also I got to tack on. So the ward boundaries, there's a process for that too, also in state law. And very interestingly, there's a petition process. If a petition is circulated in not just one ward, but any number of connected wards, and it's not a great number of signatures either. Petition gets circulated by a certain number of residents, of citizens, and that petition also describes what the preferred changes of the ward boundaries would be. That gets brought to the Common Pleas Court, and a judge will decide whether or not to change those ward boundaries. So we haven't drawn the ward boundaries either for a very, very long time. The division boundaries, again, the commissioners adjust from time to time. The ward boundaries have not been changed for many, many decades, and that's something that maybe folks around Philly may want to consider at some point. Of course, that would be politically very hairy and very complicated. Yeah, Julie, I see you smirking there. Charlene, go for it. Got a question?
Thank you. Yeah, just looking at the map superficially, not knowing the wards, because I know ward leaders can be very, very, very parochial and territorial. So just looking at it superficially, if District 1 has to lose divisions and 5 has to lose divisions, but 4 and 8 need to gain, what is the impact of communities of interest if 5 divisions are allocated to 4 and 8, and then 5 absorbs some of 1's divisions? That's the only remedy that I can see to the numbers, just looking at numbers for the population. But I don't know how that affects the wards, because I'm not familiar with the wards, and also other communities interest. I just am not familiar with that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great question. I'll just respond to it very briefly, and then Julie, kick it back to you. So the ward boundaries, and actually the local city law, the charter speaks to drawing these district boundaries around around the wards. Now, I'm not sure exactly if the law can be interpreted to a point of trying to avoid ward splits, whether the law can be interpreted that way. The way it actually is at the state level, there's some language there. But politically, of course, yeah, there's very much an incentive to try to keep wards whole, right? I don't think any ward leader wants to see their ward split. And across much of the city here, the boundaries you see are there because of a ward boundary. So actually, here, let me jump out of stop share here, so I can pull up a different version of the map where we can take a closer look. Because that's really good. That's a really good question. Morning there, Vincent. Good to see you. You're gonna love these questions and the discussion we're having right now.
I'm sorry, Pat. I was I was on mute. I forgot to hit it. Just to let everyone know, my name is Vincent Thompson. I work for Councilman Kenyatta Johnson. I want to thank Pat Christmas for putting these things together. We have been listening. Pat has been sending me the recommendations, and I am making sure that all goes to our legislative team as council is finishing up the map. We have to have it done by February. So we are taking all of this in. I can't tell anyone what the final map is going to be like. That is not my department, but I do assure people that we are taking back everything that Pat has given us, and I'm giving it to the legislative team. That's why I'm on today, to listen in. I'm just here to listen.
All right. Well, if you want to even take off your council staffer hat here and dig into some of this discussion, I'd also like you to do that, because we're having some big questions here. Okay. So the one that just got asked was, ward boundaries versus like kind of other communities of interest. Again, I think there could be a bit of a debate around what the charter says about keeping wards together. But of course, politically, the ward leaders have every incentive to keep their wards whole. And you can see there are a number of places around the map here where these lines follow ward boundaries. So up in the northwest, for example, Stinton Avenue here, right? This is both a ward boundary, a couple ward boundaries actually, but then also this is a boundary that the communities up here are generally, maybe just generally, maybe overwhelmingly okay with. But as you get to the southern part of Stinton Ave here, as it hits North Broad, so this little piece, this is because I believe this is the 17th ward. This is a piece of a ward that comes down into Germantown or Ogons, and that's why this kind of juts out. So, this is where like this particular community, West Oak Lane and these particular blocks, I'm sure they may have a different opinion about this than the ward leader would up here in this part of Philly. Maybe not. Over here in West Philly, these particular boundaries follow ward boundaries as well. But having heard from some folks out there in West Philly, I haven't heard, at least yet, particularly strong concerns or complaints about these particular lines. I mean, the ward boundaries do follow, in many cases, kind of major streets, major roads, and of course those tend to be more intuitive for residents. So I guess, Charlene, the rest of your question was like, as you start to shift people around from the districts that have more folks than they need to have to districts that have fewer, and how does that affect communities of interest? It's going to depend, of course, on a given area. And I guess what I would suggest is that, sorry, I'm going to zoom out here for a second again. So the first district and the fifth district, as we saw, having too many people right now, not like an overwhelming number of people more than they need to have, but at least several thousand more. Those trades don't necessarily have to happen only with districts that have to gain. So, for example, the fifth district having several thousand more people, and the fourth district having not enough, that doesn't mean that the fifth district only has to trade with the fourth district. You can make exchanges of divisions all across the city, and there's going to be a bit of a ripple effect as you start to tinker with the map. And we'll make sure everybody gets a follow-up email, and actually on our website already you can get a hold of this mapping software that's available to everybody. You can very quickly see when you start to tinker with the divisions in one part of the city, that starts to affect, or it can very quickly affect what the population figures are going to look like elsewhere, and then how the boundaries have to shift. So that's why this whole thing can be kind of a Rubik's cube as you start to tinker in one part of the city. And one other thing I'll note, Charlene, again, to your question, generally about communities of interest, is that sometimes community perspectives cannot all be achieved, right? There's no perfect map here that can meet everybody's objectives. And one example is up here in the near Northeast and in North Philly. We've got a perspective of where, having several different districts intersect along Castor Avenue right here. This is a big, major business corridor for this community of Oxford Circle. I don't think this is a gerrymander. I think this is just where the lines have to be drawn to kind of keep districts roughly equal in population, but they're not a huge fan of this. They'd rather have all of Oxford Circle north of Roosevelt Boulevard in the same district, presumably the 9th. So that could be one thing that gets changed here. But then the folks over here in Logan and Olney, there's a perspective here that they also kind of get kept whole. Their neighborhoods are also split, including their 5th district business corridor. But the thing is, the 9th district, and this would be one potential solution. The 9th district could not both include the rest of Logan and Olney right here and the rest of Oxford Circle over here. If we did that, the 9th district would have way too many people in it. So that's where this does get kind of complicated, and some decisions have to get made about where the changes will be and where the changes will not be. That's a great question. I mean, kind of a long-winded answer there, Charlene, your question, but it was
Yeah. Well, if 2 of the goals, and I'm not sure if with the councilmanic districts, compactness and contiguity, are they 2 of the goals? Because then you can't start jumping around. You got to think in terms of, where one district is adjacent to another. How can, if they need to give up divisions, how can you do that? But otherwise, you're going to wind up with what happened in 2001 with District 7 going up into 10. So
Well,
I know it's not easy, but
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm taking the easy way out.
No, Pat, if I can answer, you are absolutely right, Charlene. What we're trying to do is make it compact and everything together. But as Pat will tell you, it's now a math issue, right? We have we're going to have 1.6 million people. The charter says every district has to have around 160,000 people as their population. So some, as Pat has said, has gotten more, some has gotten less. So in order to kind of make everything fair, that's where the discussion is, right? But there's always a goal to make it compact and concentrated. Like a good example, you don't want to have something like the 2nd district. Let's take our district. You don't want to have it so out of whack that people would go, and Pat, I think, will agree. You don't want to have it so out of whack that people are like, wait a minute, where did that zone come from? Or where did that district come from? We don't want, and that's what all the council members are trying to do. But right now, a lot of it is I will call it the Jenga piece, right? It's a Jenga board now. We're trying to see where we can have a fair a map that meets laws, right? We don't want to violate laws, right? We don't want to have too much of weird looking districts. And that's a lot of what the council members and council technical staff is doing right now, trying to come up with that map. So we're at this time, and it's the same way with the state house, the state senate, the congressional maps. Right now, we're all playing a game of Jenga, trying to fairly put everything together. And that's why I thank folks like the Committee of 70 for what they're doing. So Charlene, we're trying. So trust us, we're not trying to make it so weird, but sometimes math can be a cruel, it can be very cruel, and you gotta make everything fit within the law.
Right. Yeah.
These gray hairs did not come from map making. I'm just letting you know, but I can tell you that there are a lot of my colleagues who are going to get gray hairs dealing with this map.
Yep. Julie, did I see your hand go up again?
Yeah. One of the things I'm thinking of, I have always found it interesting how snakes up the eastern portion of the city, and especially with population growth both in South Philly as well as like in this Fishtown, Port Richmond area. Wanted to echo Charlene's point of, I mean, I like the idea of donating districts to or divisions rather to like say 6 or 7, which would then allow like the eastern border where, Kensington, 7 and 1 are together, sort of donating population to 7 to then be able to expand, say, 7's boundary with, 5 on the eastern side. And then it's kind of like having like a domino effect of like kicking, shifting like the eastern boundary to affect the western boundary. And then that way districts like, was it 4 and 8 that need more population in their districts would, also by like having this like shift of districts, you're, losing from 1 in order to, and also 5 in order to like donate to 4 and 7, or not 4 and 7, 4 and 8. But obviously that's, totally dependent on what the community boundaries are there, like along Lehigh Avenue. And I don't know what the boundary is in Strawberry Mansion. Is that just what road is that? The western boundary there between 4 and 5.
Oh yeah, this is 33rd Street, right?
Yeah, 33rd. Yeah. So obviously, like, it then becomes a question for those communities of, where they are most, affected by boundary changes. But yeah, it's the flexibility in population size is good, right? Because then you don't have to,
Yeah. It's really important. I mean, for those who saw the first proposed congressional map that was put out there by House Republicans looked really funky. And that's because it was drawn by a woman named Amanda Holt from Lehigh County. Amanda is she's brilliant, and she's a legitimate redistricting reform advocate, but she believes very strongly that you don't split anything unless you absolutely have to, and that congressional districts have to have a 0% population deviation. And so her map, I don't think Amanda herself was not trying to draw a Republican leaning map. She just drew one though that met those particular objectives of hers. And then Seth Grove, the Republican leader of that committee, also chose that version because it happened to have a nice strong Republican lean, which of course they liked. Yeah, Julie.
Yeah, I mean, when drawing maps, you have to have some criterion that you're using as your like guide. So having no population deviation as your like main criterion is like going to produce a result that's different than, having plus or minus 5%, like whatever
Right.
And then so I know this call is about districts 1 and 2. So for
Julie, if you have no changes to District 1 and 2, it'll make my life a whole lot better. We're not joking with you. If you have no changes, it'll be great. Pat will just send me a note that says no changes on this call, and we'll just keep it moving. That's good.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always found it really, I found it really interesting of having it being a like east and west divide, like going down Broad, but only like some of it until you hit like, is that Bella Vista? Yeah. Not that needs to change. I'm just, it's interesting. That's all. The same thing with like down at Oregon and Bigler, where you have like, is that like Marconi Plaza there?
Yep.
Yeah, that was always interesting. Just.
I'm going to list that Julie likes our district the way it is, and just keep it moving. There you go.
Please tell Carlson and Johnson I find it interesting. That's all.
Okay,
just interesting.
Pat, please note that. Thank you.
Right. Well, so yeah, and for folks.
But Julie, I also think, and Pat, if I can, also think that what you're seeing, and Pat can do, a lot of these maps are based upon like what maps have been like 20 years ago, right? So like, we might have had one version of it 20 years ago, and then redistricting happened and it's 10 years ago. And now we're dealing with another version. And some of these districts, as Pat can tell you, one of the difficulty is, it's land, right? So you got to have 160,000 people, but some districts have an entire Fairmount Park in it, right?
Yeah,
So
like the
so
second district,
right,
so much land.
right,
Yeah.
well, yeah, but we have in the second district, and most people don't realize it, we have the Navy Yard, the airport, the port, all the sports stadiums, parts of Marconi Plaza. And then when you go up Broad Street, say you're driving up Broad Street toward City Hall, we've got the Kimmel Center, and we've got, I'm just giving some landmarks. A lot of people know the Kimmel Center and also the Academy of Music. With a lot of council members and others, there's going to be parts of these districts they don't want to give up, right? They just like it, right? Like I like having the sports stadiums and the Eagles and other council members. And Pat, I'm not talking out of school. Other people might say, really, I like this organization. Let me keep it. Or, I grew up on this block and this is my neighborhood. I want to keep this neighborhood. So that's what we're doing. So I tell people these maps are kind of an example of how they've morphed over like 30, 40 years. So we have to always change them as to the times that they are. That's why I always say map making is like a big game of Jenga. And I feel for the map makers.
Vincent, I think that council members may want to take a page out of what's been done statewide as far as the Legislative Reapportionment Commission and the two state government, where they're saying we are going to redistrict without incumbency in mind, without partisanship. So maybe council needs to stop saying, this has always been mine. I like it. I want to keep it. I don't want to give it up. I'm not going to work with you. I'm taking my ball and I'm going home. So,
no, I'm not saying that. Listen, understand. I'm not saying that council members are that way. I think council members want to have the fairest map. I'm just saying, as a person who has worked in government, and Pat has worked in government too, human characteristics fall into play. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that. Some people may, I'm not saying that that's Councilman Johnson, but somebody may say, you know what? The Boys and Girls Club is in my district and I've had that forever. And that's where I played basketball. That's a human characteristic that happens. And I can tell you, even with these congressional maps, there's some of that at work too, right? It's human. Humans are humans.
Yeah, I'm going to differ with you because I've sat in on all those meetings, but
and Charlene, I've sat in on meetings too.
I'm not a politician and I'm not diplomatic, so I'm just trying.
But we do agree that we are trying to map the fairest maps that we can for the city of Philadelphia. We are. I'm just saying. Just telling you, even in those meetings with Congress, there's human characteristics that play in. That's all. That's all I'm saying.
Julie, quick.
Yeah, I just want to echo Ms. Charlene. I mean, I think it's a great point of not. I think maybe my comments for both Councilman Scola and Councilman Johnson, as they're thinking about the first and second district, and council at large, as they're thinking about the maps, is to interrogate where there has been, things have always been done this way, and just interrogate in that moment, is it being done for a sentimental reason, which is, it can be valid, or is it just done because this map was drawn 30 years ago and we've kind of always just had it that way? And so there are moments where things are just always being done that way, maybe just interrogate if it's necessary, and whether it benefits the communities. And I'm not saying there's a particular example, but I think that as I've grown more accustomed in Philly politics and Philly at large, sometimes things are just always done because that's how they've always been done. And no one has interrogated whether or not it's right or whether or not it's still serving the community at large. So yeah, thank you, Ms. Charlene. I thought that was a great.
It's the used to committee in action. We used to do it this way. We used to do it that way.
Yeah. I mean, what I'd add on to that is that it's true that there is going to be some inertia to certainly city council's maps, because the cores of these districts again have been the same for a very long time, and that also means, like, for a lot of residents or communities like that, there is a boundary there. They've become familiar with it, accustomed to it. They support it already, and this is actually where I think we're doing a lot of base building really for even 10 years from now, because depending on how the city grows, there may be a not just a need, but we'll have to draw much more different districts 10 years prior. We just don't know yet. And the not the trick, but the real challenge in drawing very much different maps is, like, you got to hear from a lot of different people. Certainly, we can attest to this particular project. And during this particular time, this has been a very, very difficult, year or set of months, like, to engage folks on redistricting at any level, including council redistricting. And because one very clear, again, community perspective in one area may be out there, but then if you make a change to accommodate that community perspective, it's going to affect communities on another part of the city or another part of the district. So we'd really have to run a completely different kind of game show, and council would have to be either very much involved or actually much better have an advisory committee like they have out in Pittsburgh, for example, a separate set of folks who they go around, they have hearings, they draft a proposed map, they have more hearings, and then they bring that back to city council to take a look at and have a vote. Because maybe I'll just take a guess at this, Vincent. I don't think city council had the capacity necessarily to have 12 or 15 hearings around the city over the past 2 months with the other stuff that's been happening. Even if there was a desire for that, I mean, there is a capacity limit even for council in doing that sort of stuff.
And and just to let folks know, a lot of that is generated through the council president's office, right? So if we wanted to have that, it has to be spearheaded by the council president's office. But Charlene, I take your advice. I know Pat's going to tell me in the note that I get from him, and Julie, I do take that. That's why I'm on this call, to hear what people have to say.
All right.
I don't always give you information that you like to hear, but I do take your information back. Pat can tell you, I do take.
Thank you, Vincent.
You are so welcome.
You weren't here to hear me say I live in District 10. So
that's okay. That's okay. The great thing about Philadelphia is everybody has an opinion. It's okay. It's okay. That's good. We're not a shy city. That is good to say.
Yeah. Here, let me just bring up the map again, just real quick, because I just want to make sure that we and I realize there's not actually that much we can talk about across the entire first to second district line, right? Because we only have folks from a couple of these areas, but as already been pointed out, South Broad is most of the boundary, and South Broad has been the boundary for quite some time. I've certainly heard another perspective of where South Philly is South Philly, right? Either side of Broad Street, and Broad Street may not be the best line to have, but that's the one that's been there for a while. And this is where I think probably changing that in a different way would have too dramatic of an impact across other districts, and it would make things complicated. But this little carve out, this is one where if you look at if you don't otherwise the neighborhood may look a little funky. This is most but not all of Hawthorne. I've my sense. I'm trying to kind of reaffirm this with a couple other folks in the Hawthorne neighborhood. That there has been a preference to have Hawthorne as part of the second, just because the associations they have with the neighborhoods and residents on the other side of Broad Street. Now, this is also another example of where the divisions do provide or do create some limitations. I mean, I think Hawthorne proper kind of runs to like 10th Street, I believe. Just on the other side of 11th. Is that right, Vincent?
Generally, yes.
Yeah. Again, this is like where there can be different perspectives even around like where the neighborhood boundaries are. But yeah, Hawthorne starts at South Street, it goes down to Washington, and generally over to 10th. But then the division boundaries. I'll just zoom in just a little bit farther here. The division boundaries in like the light purple. Of course, they don't run directly down 10th Street. So even if we wanted a clean 10th Street boundary for the neighborhood of Hawthorne, that wouldn't be possible. But this is generally why I believe that's here, and part of the effort here is to try to make sure that if that community perspective is the same, to make sure that's clear for everybody. So that's up there. Of course, as we get down, Julie, I guess into your neck of the woods. I mean, all of Lower Moy-Mincing is already within the first, right? It's not split. And then on the other side of Oregon, we have, of course, the stadiums as we go south of the highway. But we do have two divisions right here that are part of the second, as opposed to being part of the first. I don't know what the story would be here. Maybe it's simply population. Maybe it's the athletic field to the right here, Marconi Plaza. I guess keeping Marconi Plaza whole, perhaps, right? Because it runs on both sides of Broad.
But here's the thing with Marconi Plaza: it's split by Broad Street. So a good example: the side with the Christopher Columbus statue is on our side, but the side with the bocce ball court is on Squilla's side, right? And it's divided by Broad Street. So it's one of those tricky things, how do you split up Broad Street? You know what I mean? So I always tell people, generally the second district is, if you're driving up Broad Street, generally everything to the left of you as you're driving up the road is the second. Generally everything to the right of you is the first. So that's how Broad Street is the dividing line.
Yeah. I mean, Julie, would you have any sense of this? I mean, of course, like the plaza and the park is on both sides, and that would be one reason to kind of keep it whole.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much like a community there of like Broad Street isn't the divider for like them. It's I would even say even like Oregon we are like civic associations boundaries are Snyder to Oregon, Broad to 7. And I mean, people, I always still get contacted by people who live south of Oregon who have like questions, especially who live like right behind Marconi on the eastern side of Broad. But yeah, I think, like 10th Street as a dividing line between the two. It's one of those, I mean, I'm sure it goes along like a division, but yeah, it's often kind of like arbitrary because,
So Julie, let me ask, would you like to have Marconi Plaza, all of Marconi Plaza? Let's just say we could make all of Marconi Plaza. Would you want it to be part of the first district, or would you want it to be part of the second?
I mean, I think since the first district has to lose, lose divisions, it makes sense for it to remain in the second district. I'm kind of wondering if where 10th and on 10th, if there's something that makes sense there to like donate some, because 10th and Bigler is like, or I guess the super site there is
on the sports stadium.
That's in your in District 2. I don't know. I know that's like part of like the Whitman community, and they're a very solid like community block, right? And so splitting it there is not the move. It's one of those things where I almost wonder if the have like thinking about before Pat's comment about Hawthorne and like the boundaries there. I know that their group is very active. So in thinking about, are there blocks or divisions that have been excluded or felt excluded from, the rest of Hawthorne, at least at the district level? I don't know.
Yeah.
See, you would get gray hair just like we do, Julie.
I'm already starting. Don't worry.
You see what I mean?
This is artificial. Don't worry.
No, this is natural up here. This is all through years of government work and being a parent. So, but we will take that in. Pat, make sure so you'd like to see, if we had to, all of Marconi Plaza, both sides, be considered part of the second council district.
Yeah, unless people that are in Marconi, feel like because I don't see the benefit in splitting it, is I guess my, there's no, like historically, people that have lived there, like don't treat Broad Street as a dividing line.
Okay.
But I don't know.
Pat, if you could make sure that in the notes that you send me, you do that. I'd appreciate it. Julie, I can't say that that's going to be the final map, but I will make sure that
Yeah,
I will make sure that that's given to our legislative team.
Yeah, no worries. I appreciate the question.
Julie, could I ask this? I reached out to the folks in Whitman, and we'll certainly follow up. But
Mhm.
the Lower Moine proper, at least with the Civic, runs to how far again? 7th?
It's brought to 7, and we're actually like split right down 7, which is, I mean, because there's also the 7th Street like corridor. There's also, well, I guess Mr. Bruce Baldwin with Ford Powell, and like he has a chunk of 7th Street as well with his org, but that's like further close to Snyder. But yeah, it is weird for 7th Street to sort of be split between Whitman and Lower Moyamensing, just given over the like past few years. I mean, yeah, the past few years with the, all of the like Southeast Asian restaurants and like community orgs that have popped up along there. Yeah, it seems like splitting it in half, at least at the like civic level, has always been strange, but who knows if that'll change.
And the residential blocks south of Oregon, I mean, are they see themselves as part of the Whitman neighborhood that's kind of farther east of you, or?
Yeah, I can't comment on that. I don't have as much familiarity there, to be honest. I think that's definitely a question for Whitman Council. Yeah. Yeah, because I know like within like by like Marconi, like they have their own civic association that's separate from like say Girard Estates.
Right.
But I don't really know. They've been very quiet over the last couple, but I don't know if that's just like a, all orgs ebb and flow, right?
Yeah. Well, here, actually, let me throw at least one more that I think of right now question out there. And it's just a kind of theoretical to spur a response. But if the first and second district boundary were to have a more dramatic shift and like shifting north, shifting up, like, so you can see there's a number of different lines that run, let's see, which, along Porter, for example, like if this whole line were to shift upwards, what would folks think about that? I mean, it would start depending where it was put. It would split Lower Moine-Mensing, right? And it would split Whitman if that went north.
Yeah. I wonder what I don't know. I wonder if there would be, I mean, I assume there would be some objections, mostly because like, yeah, I think like they've always been in the like that type of Yeah.
But it also would split Lower Moine-Mensing. It would split Whitman if it was put at Porter. And if it was
a straight east-west boundary there. Yeah.
And then
I wonder about like say, I have been wondering about that when looking at the map of just like, not for this redistricting map, but like over time, how the southern boundary of 1 and 2, or like the southeastern boundary of 1 and 2 is going to change, whether it's going to, like you said, potentially shift northwards, and whether that would just go at say like 1 year it's Oregon Avenue, or no, sorry, that's not right, because that's not a district. It goes up to Porter. You're right. Okay. Yeah. Whether it starts to like, take in, against Porter, or is that Shunk? Whatever that. North of, sorry. I was thinking of the, along 10th Street. Whether it starts there and then it continues to like move up towards like, Porter to like Wolf, which I know is a division boundary. And then like so on and so forth. Who knows?
I think I just bring that up for the sake of trying to produce a record here, like what some of the perspectives would be if this boundary were to shift north. We'd be looking at splitting the Whitman, Lower Moine-Mensing, and then with putting on, I guess, on my CMAC hat, board member CMAC, of course, like at least with the API communities, plural, like in and around Liffensburg Park and along the 7th border, they would be splitting. moved up, as well as the Latino community that's growing. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I know just in terms of like community solidarity of like how important it is to have like at the government level of like, you know, if your neighbors have the same, you know, council person as you or like what have you, just for like connecting people. Yeah. And also when there's a language barrier too, often, yeah, you like, you know, your neighbor that has, you know, is more connected to, you know, local government. But if they have someone who's totally different, then it's just like, you can often feel very like, it's very, you know, confusing or jarring to, you know, not have that connection. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like that across all communities, right? That's why keeping communities together is so important.
Yeah. And I think actually what we see here is because this portion of the city is more diverse than others. I mean, it's wherever you start drawing the lines here, you end up splitting the community. Because there are so many different ones, of course, like in this part of South Philly. So I think that was worth kind of bringing up real quick. Okay, well, hey, that was terrific. That was like exactly what we're looking for here. And again, when we're talking about these district boundaries, I mean, sometimes there are very clear changes that are preferred to given area, sometimes not. And then part of what we're trying to get here is like for anyone either in City Hall or outside of City Hall who's going to be drawing maps, that they have a better sense as well about what's happening on the ground, who's on the ground in a given part of the city. Charlene. Question.
Yes, thank you. I would just, is Vincent still with us? Vincent, are you still there?
Yes, I am, but I'm literally getting ready. I'm literally getting ready to go. I've got Christmas shopping. So
Yeah, I've got a part too, but just before I do
That's
go,
fine.
I want to implore you and council to please have public hearings, virtual and in person, to get input from your constituents and not just come up with a map and say, here's the map, like it or leave it. You know, let us give our input and then base your final map on all that input.
Yes, ma'am. I will pass that along to the council president's office.
Thank you.
The council president's office will be the one that makes the determination about hearings, right? I can tell you that there are discussions about what the map is, but whether there's hearings, that will be out of the council president's office. So Pat, if I can do this.
And Darryl Clark's not here, so.
Now, I understand, and I pass stuff along.
I'm here, I'm talking to you.
But I just want to make it clear, I do not work for the council president. I will pass it along to him. Thank you, everyone, for letting me sit in. Pat, I do appreciate it. I look forward to hearing all of your recommendations. And if there are any recommendations to the map, let me make this recommendation. You can email them to our office. Just go through our website, which is phlcouncil.com/Kenyatta Johnson. So that's our main email address. All the web submission forms come into us. I know I read them all. So, and I'm the one that forwards them over to our legislative team. So if people have that, you can do it. Every council person has a general website through the PHL Council that people in that district can send their comments to. No matter if it's about redistricting or potholes or whatever, we get it all. So for Councilman Johnson, go to phlcouncil, all one word, .com/Kenyatta, that's KENYATTA, Johnson, JOHNSON, all one word. So phlcouncil.com/Kenyatta Johnson, send an email through that, and we will make sure it gets forwarded to the right department so that they hear of your opinion. And Pat, I do look forward to your report, and I have Christmas shopping to do for my.
All right, thank you, Vince. Good luck with the shopping.
Have a great one. Have a great day, everybody.
All right, and folks, I think that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for joining. We will absolutely be in touch. Charlene, to your comments, we are certainly elevating and being much more loud around some of the things you just asked for. This has been a difficult fall. There's just been a lot happening at the city level and through city council. But this is going to get very real and very, very live right when we come back in January. So we actually are going to draft a preliminary report that includes all the perspectives shared out from across the city. And that'll be, of course, publicly available for city council and everybody else. So thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you next time. Please, if you have any questions or thoughts or comments, reach out to me directly at any time. All righty.
Of course. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Pat. Hope
Happy
you enjoy the
weekend.
rest of your weekend and have a safe holiday and a
Nice
happy
to
new
meet you,
year.
Julie.
So good to meet you too, Charlene. This was such a good conversation. I so appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
All right.
Bye,
Thanks, everybody.
Kelsey.
Bye-bye.